yeah, so this is part 3 of it. Welcome to my lifestyle chat channel. This is part 3 of what happened with my singing, why it didn't work out, and what actually happened. Why singing didn't happen and what actually happened. So I got up to the point where I've mentioned in my previous videos how I was dating one of the musicians that I met at an audition type thing. And I'll call him Y. I've called him Y in my previous videos, so I'll call him Y. And actually the guy I was dating, it was actually his band and his setup and his project. The initial audition rehearsal that I went to, that I was talking about in my last video, in my last 2 videos. So anyway, as I said, I ended up dating him and being in a long-term on-off relationship with him. So yeah, so I got to the point where I was talking about, you know, I started venturing off and meeting other musicians and working on my own songs. And basically there were various scenarios going on. There are many different types of scenarios going on. But so I'll mention a few of the main scenarios that were going on from this time. So I started, as I said, I was in the recording studio and I was working with a drummer and a guitarist, and we were putting my songs together, recording them. And I had some really decent recordings, sounding really good. Like I said, like a kind of summer, kind of funk kind of like neo-soul vibe it was. Very nice songs, and my voice was sounding really good on some of the recordings, and the music was just sounding really just kick-in, just nice on some of the recordings. So they got to a stage where there was a time when I was with the person that I was dating. I was with him, and by this time I'd been with him sort of, I'd say about 3 years, yeah, on and off, yeah. And yeah, there was a time when I was sitting with him in his place where he was living. We wasn't living together. By this stage I had my own flat and he was flat sharing, he was house sharing with somebody else. So there was a time when I went round to his and I was showing him my music. I said, oh, this is the music I've been working on in the studio. I was like, you know, have a listen sort of thing. And he listened to it, and what I should explain, I'll retrack a little bit. So this dude is from abroad, and I have said in a previous video that some of our tastes in music were similar and some of our tastes in music were very different. And I have said how up to this time I think I had actually more performance experience than he had had. I think, you know, he'd been studying and gigging around certain parts of Europe and where he's from, and where he was from and where he'd been living, I'm not very well travelled, I do admit, you know. I've travelled, but there's many places I haven't been and that I would like to visit, you know. But from people that I've met from certain parts of the world, personally, I've come to realise that people in different parts of the world, it's almost as if we live really on a different planet. Because even years later, I was having a conversation with him, well, around this time actually that I'm referring to. I think I was talking about Elvis the once with him, and I don't even think he knew who Elvis Presley was, you know. And I was just like, how can you not know who Elvis Presley is? You know, just like someone saying you don't know who Michael Jackson is. This to me was just foreign. So, and I started to realise that a lot of the music that we listen to many other countries around the world, they've got their own famous pop singers and music artists, and they'll just listen to totally different music. We are ingrained, our culture, like a lot of English music that we listen to, like American and UK, we listen to the same artists. A lot of UK music scene is very ingrained in rock, pop, blues, like black gospel, blues, rock, pop, soul. Our music is very much rooted in these genres, blues, rock and roll, the gospel. This is where rock, pop and soul, derives from. And when you're growing up around that, you just think, that's how it is all around the world. Even in Korea, they've got K-pop now. They've got that band, K-pop band. Can't think of their name right now. BLS, whatever they're called. And it's pop. It's rooted in it's pop music. But certain people I was meeting, I was becoming aware that, as I said, just because you listen to this sort of music and are into a certain vibe doesn't mean everybody else listens to this music and is into that kind of vibe. And I think where he was from and the kind of music scene that he was familiar with and into when he was abroad in his own country and when he was studying abroad around Europe, I think he was more into like death metal and that hard rock and traditional European music of his own country, of where he's from. I think that was the most kind of music that he'd been exposed to. So I think being in the UK, it was like new exposure to him, to new cultures, other cultures, and other types of genres of music. And I think meeting me and hearing and listening to the type of music that I was into, it was like a new exposure for him. It was a new exposure for both of us, for me too. So, that's to retrack a little bit. So, to get back to the point that I was saying, so yeah, I've been making my songs, and one time I went around to his place, and I was showing him. I said, "Oh, these are my recordings. Have a listen to this music we've been doing in the studio, like this." And he just went very, very quiet. He didn't really say much. But what I noticed was, this was one of the things that he would do. I noticed from this time he just kind of every now and again he would just do one and disappear. Like I wouldn't see him for maybe 3 or 4 weeks, and then he'd just come back on the scene, like come back into my life and carry on from where we left off, like normal, like nothing happened, like he hadn't just disappeared for the last 3 or 4 weeks. So this was like one of those scenarios. What would usually happen is I either just wouldn't see him, or some kind of tiff or argument would occur, which means which would be his excuse for me not to see him. And that's what happened. I think we didn't see each other for about 2 months or something. It was quite long ago, so I can't remember the exact details, but it was either like a good couple of weeks. I think it was more so sort of like 2 to 3 months I didn't see him. And basically, the next time I saw him, he came round to mine, and I was like, "Oh, how you been then? What you been up to then, this and that." He was like, "Oh, well, And then he was like, "Oh, I've been going to the university and I found some new, like a new singer and musicians and this and that. And he played some of his recordings to me. But I think he had video recordings. So I saw the new singer who was in, it's like he had a total new light, that was it. Oh yeah, that was, so when I showed him, when I let him listen to my music, that was it. He didn't not say anything. What he said, he was like, oh, he just went quiet and then he goes, I'm going to change all my band members. It's like, I think I need to change. I just need to make some changes like this. And then, as I said, I didn't see him for a long time. And then the next time I saw him, he had a whole total new lineup of band musicians. And his sound was totally different. It was much more like, more funky. Much more lively, much more funky. So, prior to the change in his lineup, obviously I met him because he was I auditioned as a singer, and as I said, I started dating him. So, you know, I was with him as he was gathering his musicians together and working on his project. And there was a singer he met. She was like African, and you know, the kind of lyrics that she came up with was all to do with like peace and love and justice and, you know, this kind of vibe. So I was like, oh, I started to see the direction of the music where what he wanted his music to represent and be about. But I always used to music where what he wanted his music to represent and be about. But I always used to
Oh, what kind of silly timer is that?